I want to talk a little bit about watering your plants. Now, out of all the plant questions that I get, this is one of the top. How often do you water your plants? Now, it seems like a really simple question, right? I can just answer, well, I water my plant once a week or 4 days once. But how I water my plants might not apply to you. If you follow me, your plant might die or it might be dehydrated. Okay? So watering your plants, it's like a whole thesis itself. I know, because when I started as a newbie, I am really confused with watering. Because I ask the same questions. I ask all the sifus, all the master sifus, how often do you water your plants? Now I know why it's so difficult for them to answer the question. Because it depends on so many things. One sifu might tell you, well, I water my plants once a week. And another sifu might tell you, I water my plant 4 days once, and it's exactly the same plant. And you're like, what? Once a week and 4 days once for the same plant? So which sifu is correct? They're both correct, because they both live in different environment. So the first thing is, before I say anything, I want to establish my environment. So I live in Malaysia, and Malaysia is a very hot country. It's sunny all year round, so we do not have 4 seasons. Our plants grow all year round. So we're very lucky. But at the end of the year, we usually get a spell of monsoon. So we get rain, for a few months at a time. And we get like spurts of sun during this rainy season. So you can call the monsoon season our winter. But I don't think it's as bad as the real winter. We still get sun, but we get a lot of rain. So that is our environment. We're very sunny, we're very hot, and sometimes rainy. And our humidity is quite high, like my guess is about 70%. So a lot of aeroids work very well in Malaysia. But having said that, the humidity in my house is so different from the humidity in my balcony. So the humidity in my balcony might be 70%, okay? But in the house, it probably dropped to 40% because I have fans running. We have fans running, and it dries the soil faster. It also dries the leaf faster. So it's so different. So how I water the plant, the same plant, if I put it inside the house and if I put it outside the house, is totally different. So now that I've established that this is my environment, we can go on. Now, environment, as I said, is one important element of how you would water your plant. Now, if a place is really dry, obviously you have to water your plants more frequently. Okay? If your place is, for instance, your plants are in the garden and it gets rain on, you probably don't even have to water your plant. Like in the monsoon season, for my friends who live in a house that has a garden where the plants are out in the elements, they don't even have to water their plants because every day the rain waters them. And rainwater is the best water because it comes from the sky. There is no contamination, okay? There is no chemicals inside the water, and there's a lot more oxygen inside rainwater. That is why plants that are watered with rainwater looks really beautiful. And I'm really, really jealous of my mom's garden, for instance. She plants all these plants and they look gorgeous, but when they come to my place, they look, well, not as gorgeous, they look a bit sad. Or when I have a sad plant, I bring it to my mom's place and put it in her garden. And she has full sun every day, and she has rainwater, and the plant just flourishes. So there is no comparison. If you can collect rainwater, that is the best for your plant. But if not, I guess you have to use tap water like me. So sometimes you just work with what you have. Okay, so environment is one of the things that affects how frequently you water your plants. So look at your environment and study it and see how hot it is, how much humidity there is, and that will decide how much water or how often you would water your plants. Now, the second thing that affects the watering of your plants. Now, before that, I'm not an expert, okay? I'm not a botanist. I'm just a plant mama. So what I'm telling you is what I've experienced through these few years that I've been collecting plants. And yes, I haven't been collecting plants for a long time, but my plants seem to be doing all right. So I guess I'm doing the right things. So this is just my opinion and my experience, okay? You would have to also study your plant or play around with it and see what suits your plants in your environment. Okay, let's go back to watering your plants. Now the second thing that affects the watering of your plant, which I think is so important, is the substrate, what you grow your plants in. Now most of my aeroids, if you have been following my videos, I grow them in cocoa chips and charcoal and leca. And sometimes if I feel like the aeroid is like a heavy aeroid that if it grows big it would topple, with all this really chunky and light substrate, I would add potting mix to just anchor the plant. So these are the main four things that I usually use for my aeroids. I use charcoal and leca beads. Like if I have charcoal, I'll use charcoal. If I have leca, then I use leca. So these two are interchangeable because these two are supposed to be the draining elements. The cocoa chip is supposed to be the moisture element. But having said that, because they are cocoa chips, they don't retain water in the soil. So now I'm going all over the place. But anyway, cocoa chips, they don't retain water in your substrate. Like for instance, potting mix. Potting mix is actually soil, right? I call it soil. We call it soil here. So if you compare cocoa chips and soil, the soil will retain more water for a longer time. And the cocoa chips, because it is chunky, like it's in little bits, it will let the water drain out, but because it's also like a sponge, it will also absorb sponge in each individual chip. So cocoa chip is actually a moisture element. For me, it is a moisture element, but it does not retain water in your pot. Okay, so if you have a substrate like mine, basically every time I water the plant, most of it drains out, some of it gets sponged into the cocoa chip. I can water my plants more frequently and not be afraid of rotting the roots. Now, if your plant is in potting mix, if you water as frequently as I do, the water will be stored at the bottom of the pot mostly, and it will always be wet there. So when your roots reach that part, and it's always in the wet part of the soil, it will rot your roots. So that is why when I first asked the Sifus about substrate, they tell me it has to be a fast draining substrate. And then they tell me they use cocoa chips. In my mind, because I'm a newbie, I'm like, cocoa chips is like a sponge. So doesn't it keep water like a soil would? But no, it does not. Because it is chunky. It just keeps water in its own individual chip. It doesn't keep water throughout the whole pot. So for aeroids, I would usually use this substrate, and it is well draining and it is airy because there are like holes inside. Imagine inside the pot there are pockets of nothing because of the chips. They don't clump together. Your roots can breathe properly, and if they're thirsty, they can absorb the moisture content from the cocoa chip. So it keeps your roots hydrated, but it doesn't drown your roots. So substrate is so important. For plants, I also have plants that I use quite a lot of potting mix, like for my monsteras, because they're so huge, I have to use a lot of potting mix in it. So there is a lot more soil in those plants, in those huge plants, than say my small potted philodendron whatever. Okay, so for the monstera, I'm more careful with my watering because I know the potting mix is going to retain so much more water in there. And I would make sure that if I have a plate underneath my pot, I would lift up the pot with like little flat stones. I buy flat stones, like landscaping stones. I will lift the pot, put the flat stones, and put the pot on top of the plate. For people who have a garden, they don't have to do that. They can just spray their plants and water their plants, and all the water will drain out and go out into garden. But I can't do that obviously in my condominium, or else my condominium will be flooded with water every time I water my plants. So I always have a plate underneath, I lift up my pot. So if the water drains out, it drains out onto the plate, but it's lifted, it doesn't touch what's inside the pot. But then you'll be asking, like me, I asked this question, what about those plants that live in water, like what my mom used to do? She would have her money plant or her pothos in a tub of water or in a glass jar with water. Why don't those plants die? Why don't the roots rot on those plants? Well, the answer is because water has a lot of oxygen in it. So the plant is able, the roots are able to breathe in water. And come on, you change your water, right? So every time, maybe a few days once or once a week, you throw the water away, you give the plant fresh water. So the oxygen is renewed inside the water and the plant roots get to breathe again. But whereas if you have water stuck at the bottom of a pot, like in a potting mix, those are stagnant water and there is actually no more oxygen in that water after a while. So the roots get suffocated and they rot. Which means if your water is constantly circulating or circulated, like for instance the glass jar, you change the water all the time. Or for instance, if you put your plant near or inside a fountain, but the water is running continuously and the oxygen gets renewed all the time, then your roots will be fine. So substrate is very important. Look into your substrate, see what you have in your plant, and adjust your watering schedule accordingly to your substrate. Now the next thing is whether your plant is an old plant, well, a mature plant, or a new plant. Okay? If it's a very matured plant, I would go more on the watering. There's a very simple logic behind that. Let me show you this plant that I just repotted. Now that is a very matured plant and it is also root bound. So for months before I decided to repot this plant is actually a Sigonium. I've been watering it every single day and it is outside in the sun. It dries up every single day for me. So this plant I had to water it every single day because there's just so much roots inside the pot that one, all the water gets absorbed by the plant, and two, because there's so much roots in there, the roots looks as if it's taken over the substrate, so there's really not much substrate in there left. Okay, so that is why this plant I had to water every day. So again, it depends on whether your plant is matured, whether it's root bound or it's a new plant. So root bound and matured plants, you really have to give more water. For new plants, plants that you've just gotten from the nursery maybe, the root is so tiny, it's just like a few roots. Don't water that too much, okay? Because if you water that too much, all the water stays in the pot because nothing gets absorbed. The plant has so many roots and can only absorb so much water. So if you water that plant as much as I water a root-bound plant, the roots will rot because most of the water will stay in the pot. Okay, another element is how much light your plant is getting. Okay, the more light your plant gets, it can take more water. Okay, if your plant is in a more shaded area, it doesn't need so much water. Because if your plant, for instance, is in a very bright, very sunny area, first of all, the sun will evaporate the water. Secondly, the plant gets to grow more vigorously than, say, a plant that's in the shade. Okay, the same plant that's in the shade. So it needs more water in the system. So more light, your plant will be able to take more water. Okay. The other thing that I find affects the watering of your plant is what pot you use. I feel like now I'm going more into terracotta pots because it feels so, it feels rustic for one. And then it feels like my plant, the roots can breathe in a terracotta pot. Now there are also two types of terracotta pot. I mean, the ones that I buy from Daiso, they are glazed inside. So that one doesn't allow the roots to breathe too much. Okay, the ones I get from the nursery, it's just raw terracotta, there's no glaze inside. That one allows water to evaporate very fast, okay, and allows aeration to occur better. Now, there are also pots that are used which are ceramic pots, all those contemporary modern ceramic pots, but they have like a glaze outside the pot. Now, that kind of pot don't evaporate so much. Okay, so that one you can actually not water your plant too much. Okay, so the pot also plays a role in how much you water your plants. Now, watering depends on how big your pot is. Obviously, if your plant is like grown in a huge pot, okay, substrate aside, it's grown in a huge pot, obviously the moisture takes a longer time to dehydrate from the pot. Okay, it dehydrates from the outside to the inside, so maybe the middle is still wet. Okay, for bigger pots and for pots that's inside my house, I probably water it maybe less. Sometimes if it's a monsoon season and there's humidity in the air, even in my house, I probably water that plant 2 weeks once if it's in a huge pot. Like for instance, my fiddle leaf fig. This huge pot, right? It's so huge that this plant gets watered maybe once in 2 weeks. But for something like this is my jewel orchid, okay? This one is in a terracotta pot. The substrate is cocoa chips and moss, and it sits right beside the window. So this plant I get to water every day. And because it's a jewel orchid, it actually likes the substrate to be more moistened than other plants. And the pot is small. Yes, we were talking about small pots and big pots, right? And the pot is small. So, yep, this one I get to water every day. Okay, another thing is, if you're hanging the plant, as opposed if the plant is sitting on something, the hanging plant requires more water than the plant that's sitting on a table. Because logically speaking, if you hang a plant, there's more aeration going through from the bottom, from the top, and then the air goes through in a circle, okay? So it dries the soil or it dries your substrate more quickly, so you can water the plant more frequently. How much you give water to your plant depends on what plant it is, okay? Like for instance, if your plant is an epiphyte means plants that climb on another plant, okay? Those you probably need to mist it more than you need to water it, okay? Then again, there are some exceptions, which you will you will hear about it later. So if your plant is a bog plant, for instance, a bog plant means the plant lives in part water. Like I have a few carnivorous plants outside in my balcony. Those are bog plants, so they always need to be sitting in water. So unlike aeroids, these guys love to be flooded. They love to be sitting in water and their roots won't rot. Okay? Now if your plant is lives on a rock crevice, for instance, the Anthurium clarinervium, it lives on a rock crevice. So mostly it loves a lot of breeze, because that's what you get on a rock crevice, and it doesn't really need a lot of water in the roots because it holds itself onto the rocks. Okay, so that's its natural habitat. Okay, or for instance, if your plant is a succulent, okay, if your plant is succulent, it lives in an arid environment in the desert, and it can maintain a lot of moisture in the leaves. It really doesn't need to be watered too often, and it also doesn't really like a humid environment. So that's why there's quite a lot of people in Malaysia who find it very, very difficult to grow succulents. It's because our environment here is too humid for the bugger. So it really depends on what plant is in question. So know your plant. When you buy a plant, maybe just go and do a little bit of research of the plant on the internet and look at where its natural habitat is, and try first to mimic its natural habitat. But then again, having said that, okay, most plants now are tissue cultured and they're grown in the lab. So the lab is their natural habitat. So whatever the propagators give them, that is what their natural environment is. So for instance, if you know a plant has already acclimated to maybe an aircon condition, or if a plant has already been acclimated to a lot of water, because I know nurseries like to water their plants every 2 days. Okay, your anthuriums have been watered every 2 days and they've already died and regrown, and the new cells have already acclimated to being watered every 2 days. Then you have to water the plant every 2 days, I guess. So that is the other element, know your plant. So you see, all these little things affect how much you water your plants. Now, it's really, really complicated, I know, because I've been through it and I was like, oh my gosh, I wish I can just water my plants. Like, some people can have 1 day in a week and they water all their plants, okay? Which is great because they've actually acclimated the plant to be able to wait 1 week for the water to come. I have friends who do that, okay? They adjust the substrate, okay? And then they acclimate the plant to be able to follow their schedule instead of you following your plant's schedule. Overwatering kills plants more often than underwatering. So, underwatering plants just keeps the plant dry. The plant's leaves will curl in. It will have its defense mechanism to conserve water. The plant is actually very clever. They are very clever. They have built-in mechanisms that if they don't get water, they will curl their leaves to conserve water. They will not grow more leaves so that they don't use up too much water. But if you overwater your plant and you let water sit inside the pot, they can't do anything. They just drown. They don't have a mechanism they don't have a lifeguard to pull their roots out from the drowning soil. They don't have a mechanism for that. So that is why it is safer to underwater your plants than to overwater your plants. Okay? Okay, let's see. I know I'm going all over the place because my brains are going all over the place, but I'm just telling you from experience and from what I can remember about generally watering your plants. So I hope this helps, because if I had someone who would sit with me when I was a newbie and talk to me, just spend a day talking to me about watering, about his experience or her experience on watering the plants, tell me all these little funny stories about watering plants, I will be so happy. So I hope this video will help some of you guys who are still new to the plant world and who are still confused by watering. To be honest, I'm still confused by some of my plants. For instance, this is another little story I can tell you. For instance, I have a Hoya Kertsii, and from all the articles that I've been reading, some people will say that, oh, my Hoya lives in the shade, in part shade, and I don't even have to water the plant. And it's flourishing, and you see like this Instagram photo of this huge Hoya, okay? And then I read another article and someone says, oh, my Hoya is in full sun and I water it every day, and this Hoya looks like an Instagram Hoya. I'm like, what? It's the same Hoya, but it's two different environments again. So my Hoya, I looked at the plant and it looks like an epiphyte plant. So my thought is, well, this Hoya is an epiphyte. it's not always planted in a substrate. It's always stuck on a tree or something, so it probably doesn't get a lot of water. Okay, and because it's under a tree, it gets quite a lot of shade. So to me, logically speaking, the Hoya is a part shade plant. It doesn't need a lot of water. Okay, from my thoughts. But obviously I was wrong because I didn't water my Hoya a lot, and I placed it on cocoa chips, which mimics tree. Okay, I didn't place it on soil, and I put it in part shade, so I didn't have to. I squirt it once in a while, like, you know, when it gets blasted by rain, it gets like the rain spurts. So I tried to mimic that environment, and my Hoya was dropping leaves like crazy. I'm like, oh my God, am I still overwatering this plant? What's happening? So one day I was so angry. I said, okay, I'm going to do the exact opposite of what I'm doing now. I put my Hoya in the sunniest part of my balcony, and I blasted it with water every day. And guess what? It's flourishing. In 3 days, it grew like new leaves for me. It grew like new little vines for me. I'm like, what? I should have done this a year ago, right? I have my Hoya for a year, and it's been suffering, like dehydrated for a year, and I didn't know about it. So you see, from this story, one, you know, the Hoya is a very hardy plant. It was dehydrated for more than a year, okay, and it didn't die on me. It just dropped its leaf, because when it dropped its leaves, it keeps the plant alive, because then it doesn't need so much moisture to maintain the leaves, right? And two, once you give it the right environment, it will just woof, it will grow back for you. Okay, so plants are very hardy. Most plants are very hardy if you give it the right environment. Okay, and even if you underwater the plant, it won't die on you, like my Hoya. So what's a very good gauge to know when you need to water your plant? You can go to Lazada or Shopee and buy one of those devices that measures the moisture content in the soil. You can stick it in, and it will tell you if you need to water that plant. But from the beginning of time, I've been using a super device which I trust the most, and the device is this finger. I'm not joking, it's true. So what I do is, when I feel like I don't know if this plant needs watering, I'll just stick my finger into the substrate. Okay, if it's a big pot, you have to stick it in deeper, obviously. If it's a small pot, then you probably stick it in until like the first joint of your finger. Stick it in and feel the substrate. If the feeling is still wet, obviously you don't have to water the plant, because usually when the substrate dries, it looks dry on top, okay, but it's actually still wet inside. So if you stick a finger in, if it's still cold to the touch, then you can actually wait for 1 more day or 2 more days, and then stick a finger in again. And if it's dry, you know, you can water your plant. Okay guys, I hope I've covered quite a bit on watering. If there is anything I think about, I will add on to this video before I post it. If you guys have any questions at all that I didn't think of talking about, please ask in the comments. I will try and answer all your questions if I know the answer. If I don't know the answer, I will do a little bit of research and see if I can get the answer for you. If even with research I can't get the answer for you, then then I can't answer the question for you, obviously. But I will try my very best to answer your questions about watering or any other things you want to ask me. So I guess I'll stop here. I think this video has been quite long. It's been quite a long video of you guys listening to me blabber, blabber, blabber. I hope it's been helpful as well. And I will see you guys again soon. Bye.